This is macOS Ken.
Scary, fast, and hitting tonight. Evercore is stoked for Apple earnings this week, and good news for Apple out of India. It is Monday, the 30th of October, 2023. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from macOS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSCan. If you were thinking of buying any Apple anything today besides an iPhone or an Apple Watch, maybe hold off for 24 hours. You've likely not forgotten, but just in case, Apple has some sort of product announcement streaming event planned for this evening, referred to as Scary Fast. Associated event art practically guarantees some sort of Mac announcement. The Mac rumors piece over the weekend had regulatory filings in China tied to Mac and Magic Keyboard batteries, lending credence to the new Mac expectations. Throwing in a wild card, though, those same battery filings also apply or applied to iPad mini. What will Apple announce today? Since we don't know, if you're thinking of buying any Apple anything besides an iPhone or an Apple Watch, maybe hold off for 24 hours. Apple's Scary Fast event is an evening affair here in the States, set to pop at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. You can catch it on Apple's events page, apple.com/events. You can catch it on YouTube and through the Apple TV app, where it is finally showing up. If you miss it as it happens, it will be made available as a podcast, either audio or video. Bloggers will blog, microbloggers will miss the old days, and we'll hit highlights here on Tuesday. Evercore analyst Amit Daryanani is feeling great about Apple's September quarter earnings, and decent about December. On Friday, Apple 3.0 ran part of a note he wrote. The way he sees it, Apple should report in line to modestly better September quarter results on the back of a continued services acceleration and a solid initial start to iPhone 15 sales. According to the analyst, launch sales for iPhone 15 were likely in line with the iPhone 14 sales a year ago. However, the higher entry-level price for iPhone 15 Pro Max has Daryanani seeing iPhone ASPs rising about 3%. As for services, the note says revenue for that segment should surprise to the upside in both September and December quarters, with App Store data showing a sustained acceleration and advertising channel checks pointing to a continued recovery in digital advertising. Both Mac and iPad will likely continue to see large declines in his estimation, though the analyst thinks that is already baked in to expectations. Daryanani has now outperformed rating on Apple shares. His price target on the shares is $210. It is a big week for afternoon and evening events for Apple. There's a Scary Fast thing happening tonight, then Apple's September quarter earnings later this week, Thursday, the 2nd of November. That'll happen in the usual stages. Numbers will hit after the bell at around 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. After that, Apple execs and analysts will hit the phone at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. That'll stream through Apple's site. It'll be made available as a podcast soon after. Bloggers will blog. Microbloggers will continue to be inconsolable. And of course, we will hit the numbers here on Friday. For a company as big as Apple, $6 billion may not be a tremendous amount of money. But the growth this $6 billion represents is notable. A report from AppleMust cites a filing with India's Registrar of Companies. According to that, Apple's revenue in India reached 500 billion rupees in fiscal year 23, the equivalent of $6 billion US. The piece says Apple sales in India were up 48% by value, while profits climbed 76%. That is the fastest growth in net profit for Apple in India for the last 5 years, according to local reports. Where the company is doing particularly well is in the ultra-premium smartphone segment. Apple's share of that market stands at 59%, according to the report. Manufacturing seems to be going well across the board. Of the 12 million smartphones shipped out of India in June, the piece has local reports indicating that Apple accounted for almost 50%. Growth for that segment may be kicking into higher gear. Another report from AppleMust says iPhone production by Indian conglomerate Tata Group is finally getting underway. According to the piece posted Friday, India's deputy IT minister announced that Tata Group will begin making iPhones for local and international markets at a former Wistron factory in late October. With a little over 24 hours left in October, one assumes that production has begun or will any minute now. While India has been producing iPhones for a few years, this is the first time iPhone production will be handled by an Indian company. Foxconn and Wistron, the two companies that have made iPhones in India to this point, are both Taiwanese firms. Tata's entrance comes as Wistron exits India's iPhone manufacturing business, though it is not exiting Apple in India entirely. While Wistron has sold its iPhone factory to Tata, a report earlier this year said Wistron would maintain a unit in India that maintains and repairs Apple products. If anything looks weak for Apple in India, it could be services, though even that weakness leaves room for optimism. According to the filing referenced by AppleMust, just under 95% of Apple's revenue in India comes from product sales, while just over 5% comes from services and maintenance. AppleMust expects an emphasis by Apple on growing services in India in the days ahead. If new features and security fixes weren't enough to move you to iOS 17.1, maybe give this a try. A report from Cult of Mac cites benchmarks from the YouTube channel iAppleBytes, indicating that last week's update increases the battery life of several older iPhone models. According to the report, the first version of iOS 17 reduced the battery life of several older iPhones. Now, the cult says, iAppleBytes found iPhone 13, iPhone 12, and iPhone SE 2020 all saw increases to their battery lives by installing the new version. iPhone 13 went up 15% for the biggest improvement. If you have an iPhone XR or iPhone 11, you should probably still update for the security fixes. Be warned though, battery performance may take a hit. Indications are that iOS 17.1 brought a drop in battery life for those two phones versus iOS 17. Hot on the heels of developer betas, a few OS betas with which Apple's public testers can play. On Friday, Mac Rumors ran a couple of reports, one on public betas for iOS and iPadOS 17.2, and another on a public beta for macOS Sonoma 14.2. Each of the betas has stuff and things. If you're in the public beta program, get to testing. If the fun they get to have makes you jealous and hateful, turn your acrimony into action at beta.apple.com. More support for a HomePod with a screen on the horizon. I told you last week of pictures of an unreleased HomePod with a large touchscreen sensor on the top. I also told you of an email I'd received that had a HomePod telling listener Chris that options for the thing Chris had asked for were on the screen, even though HomePod doesn't have a screen. Now 9to5Mac has gone spelunking and found hints of such a thing in code. According to the site, last week's first developer beta of tvOS 17.2 shows strong evidence that Apple is internally running tvOS on the iPad. Kinda weird, since tvOS only runs on Apple TV and HomePod. For better context, 9to5Mac says every firmware released by Apple includes device support files that specify which devices the software can be installed on. Among those files in iOS 17.2, the site says, are support files for the iPad Mini 6. 9to5Mac says the tvOS 17 SDK also includes hidden support for the iPad Mini 6. While the site's just guessing, they're guessing Apple is working on a HomePod with a display and apparently using an iPad Mini to test it. And finally today, wondering where all the next-gen CarPlay cars are? 9to5Mac says Apple still says you will hear announcements before the end of this year, which ends in 2 months. First showcased at WWDC 2022, Apple's CarPlay website talks up the offering, saying it provides content for all the driver screens, including the instrument cluster, ensuring a cohesive design experience that is the very best of your car and your iPhone. Vehicle functions like radio and temperature controls are handled right from CarPlay. The same page says, vehicle announcements coming in late 2023. I don't want to alarm anybody, but there's not a lot of 2023 left. Then again, it was just about a week ago that Bloomberg's Mark Gurman said there could be new Macs announced before the end of October, and look what we're expecting today. Also, striking auto workers may be playing havoc with CarPlay rollout plans, perhaps delaying any announcements. I guess, watch that space. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media. Online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.